Lieutenant Daniel Walsh pressed himself deeper into the blood-red soil of Caraxes, the alien planet that had been his home for the past 11 months. His breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to stem the flow of blood from the wound in his side. The ambush had been perfectly executed, his squad separated, communications jammed, and the extraction point overrun. Now he was alone in enemy territory with a broken transmitter and dwindling ammunition. The twin suns of the Cardassian system were beginning to set, casting long shadows across the crimson landscape. Daniel knew that darkness would bring the nocturnal predators that even the native Caraxians feared. If the enemy patrols didn't find him first, the local wildlife certainly would. He checked his medical kit again, one stim pack left, barely enough to keep him conscious through the night. His tactical display flickered weakly, showing multiple enemy signatures converging on his position. Intelligence had severely underestimated the Cardassian presence in this sector. Someone had bad intel, or worse, someone had sold them out. Alpha Squad, this is Walsh, he whispered into his comm unit, knowing it was futile. Position compromised. Requesting immediate extraction. Only static answered him, punctuated by the distant sound of Cardassian hover vehicles. Daniel dragged himself toward a cluster of rock formations, leaving a trail of blood that he knew would be all too visible to Cardassian scanners. Their vision spectrum included infrared, they would track his heat signature easily in the cooling evening air. 27 years old, and this godforsaken planet would be his grave. The Caraxian-human war had raged for nearly 3 years across multiple star systems. Earth's colonies had expanded into territory the Cardassian Empire considered their ancestral domain. Diplomacy had failed before it began, Emperor Razeth was not known for compromise. The propaganda vids described the Caraxians as merciless conquerors, their elongated bodies and reflective skin making them appear almost serpentine to human eyes. Kill or be killed, that was the reality of this conflict. A rustling sound from behind a nearby rock formation froze Daniel in place. He raised his pulse rifle with trembling hands, the weight nearly unbearable in his weakened state. A shadow detached itself from the rocks, too small for a Cardassian patrol unit, moving with deliberate stealth. "Show yourself," Daniel croaked, finger tightening on the trigger. The figure stepped forward, cloaked in what appeared to be a thermal-dampening fabric. A slender hand emerged from the folds, palm out in what he recognized as a universal gesture of peace. The hood fell back, revealing a face that made Daniel's breath catch. Silver-blue skin caught the dying sunlight, almost luminescent against the darkening sky. Large, almond-shaped eyes regarded him with caution, eyes of deep violet that seemed to pierce through him. Definitely Cardassian, but smaller than the warriors he'd encountered in battle. Female, if their biology paralleled human gender dimorphism. "You will die if you stay," she said in accented but perfect English. Patrols approached from the east and north. Daniel kept his weapon raised. "Why would you care?" Her head tilted slightly, an oddly human gesture of consideration. "Not all of us desire this war, human." A distant whine of engines made her glance over her shoulder. Without warning, she moved toward him with startling speed. "Kill me or trust me. Decide now." Daniel's tactical training screamed danger, but something in those violet eyes made him hesitate. The Cardassian took his momentary indecision as consent and grasped his armor, displaying strength disproportionate to her slender frame. She began dragging him toward the rock formation. "My name is Thera," she said as she pulled him into a concealed crevice that widened into a narrow tunnel. "And you are very fortunate I found you before the 7th Division did." The last thing Daniel registered before consciousness slipped away was the surprisingly gentle touch of her fingers checking his pulse, and the faint scent of something like cinnamon as she leaned close to examine his wounds. His final thought before darkness claimed him, nothing in his training had prepared him for being rescued by the enemy. Daniel woke to the sound of water dripping somewhere nearby. Pain throbbed in his side, but it was duller now, manageable. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as fire lanced through his torso. The wound was deep. You should not move yet. The voice came from the shadows of what Daniel now recognized as a cave. The walls glimmered with bioluminescent fungi native to Caraxes, casting an ethereal blue glow throughout the space. His tactical gear had been removed, his wound professionally dressed with what appeared to be a combination of military-grade synth skin and local medicinal plants. Thera emerged from the darkness, her silver-blue skin almost merging with the ambient light. She moved with predatory grace, each step deliberate and silent. Up close, the differences between their species were both subtle and profound, her elongated limbs, the slight ridge along her spine visible through her fitted garment, the way her eyes reflected light like a cat's. "You should have left me," Daniel said, his voice rough from thirst. She approached with a container of water. "Perhaps. But I have questions about humans that dead ones cannot answer." Daniel accepted the water cautiously, watching her over the rim as he drank. The liquid had a mineral taste but was clean. "Is that why you saved me? Scientific curiosity?" Thera settled across from him, maintaining a tactical distance. "Smart. Not entirely. Your kind are spoken of as mindless destroyers, invaders with no honor or culture. I find such absolute judgments suspect." "Funny," Daniel replied. "We're told the same about Caraxians. Bloodthirsty conquerors who'd rather annihilate us than talk. And yet here we sit, talking." Her mouth curved slightly, an expression he recognized as the Carassian equivalent of a smile. It revealed teeth that were slightly sharper than human ones. Daniel glanced around the cave. "Where are we?" "Old mineral extraction tunnels. Abandoned before the war. We are approximately 18 kilometers from where I found you, and 5 kilometers below the patrol routes." She handed him a nutrient packet, standard Carassian military rations. "This is compatible with your digestive system. I checked your medical databases." "You hacked our systems?" Daniel accepted the food despite his suspicion. "Knowledge is survival," she replied simply. "Your wounds will need 3 solar cycles to heal sufficiently for travel. The tunnels extend toward your forward operating base. I can guide you." "Why would you do that?" "I'm the enemy." Thera's violet eyes studied him with unnerving intensity. "Are you? Or are you simply a soldier following orders, as I once was?" "Once was." She turned away, busying herself with a portable medical scanner. "Rest. We will speak more when you are stronger." Over the next 3 days, Daniel's strength gradually returned. Thera proved to be a skilled medic, changing his dressings with expert precision. She would disappear for hours at a time, returning with supplies and intelligence on patrol movements. Each evening, their conversations grew longer. "Your military tactics are inefficient," she told him on the second night as they shared a meal of local fauna she had hunted. "You rely too heavily on technology that our jammers easily disrupt." "Is that a professional assessment?" Daniel asked, noting the way she handled her weapons with practiced familiarity. "I was trained in combat tactics since childhood." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't optional. "All Carassian children of a certain position are." "Position?" She ignored the question. "Your forces fight as individuals, even when in squads. Caraxians fight as extensions of one will. This is why you lose ground." "We don't always lose," Daniel countered. "No. Your adaptability is impressive." She tilted her head, studying him. "It is what Emperor Razith fears most about humans. Your unpredictability." By the 3rd day, Daniel could move without assistance. He watched Thera prepare a map of their route, her fingers tracing paths through holographic terrain with practiced ease. Her movements were precise, economical. Beautiful, in their alien way. "You know our language perfectly," he observed. Our tactics, our medicine. You've studied us extensively. Know your enemy completely, or do not engage them at all. She recited it like a mantra. First principle of Cardassian warfare. Is that why you're helping me? To know your enemy? Thera paused, violet eyes meeting his. Perhaps I am helping you because not all enemies must remain so. Perhaps I see in your species something my father. She stopped abruptly, turning back to the map. Your father? A high-ranking military officer, she said too quickly. One who believes all humans should be eradicated rather than understood. Daniel sensed she wasn't telling the whole truth, but the vulnerability in her voice was unmistakable. He found himself wanting to trust her, despite everything his training told him. That night, as they prepared for the journey ahead, Thera sat beside him, closer than she had before. In the blue glow of the cave fungi, her skin seemed to shimmer with subtle patterns. Why did you become a soldier, Daniel Walsh? She asked softly. The use of his full name startled him. How did you? Your identification tags. She gestured to his dog tags. Daniel Walsh, Lieutenant, Earth Defense Force. He considered the question. Family tradition, initially. Then I believed in the cause, protecting our colonies. Now. He sighed. Now I'm not sure what I believe anymore. War has that effect, she replied. Her hand moved unconsciously to a scar along her neck, old, but clearly the result of combat. And you? Why do you fight? Thera's eyes darkened. I was born to it. But I have seen enough death to last several lifetimes. There must be another way. As she spoke, her hand inadvertently brushed against his. The contact sent an unexpected current through Daniel. Her skin was warmer than a human's, with a texture like smooth suede. She didn't pull away immediately, and in that moment, something shifted between them. We should rest, she finally said, withdrawing her hand. Tomorrow will test both our endurance. As Daniel drifted toward sleep, he realized two troubling things. He was beginning to trust this Cardassian warrior, and worse, he was beginning to care what happened to her. Neither boded well for his duty as an Earth Defense Force soldier. The tunnels were a labyrinth of narrow passages and cavernous chambers, their walls glistening with mineral deposits that reflected their helmet lights in prismatic bursts. Daniel followed Thera's lead, marveling at how confidently she navigated the subterranean maze. His wound protested with each step, but the modified stim packs she had provided kept the pain manageable. These tunnels predate the modern Cardassian Empire, Thera explained as they paused at a junction. My people were miners before we became conquerors. Hard to imagine Caraxians as anything but soldiers, Daniel admitted, watching her check a compact holomap projector on her wrist. Just as it is difficult for me to imagine humans as anything but invaders. She gave him a pointed look. Perspective shapes reality more than truth does. The passage they followed gradually sloped upward, bringing them closer to the surface. Twice they were forced to halt and extinguish their lights as patrols passed overhead, so close that dust sifted down from the ceiling. Each time, Thera positioned herself protectively between Daniel and the potential threat, her hand resting lightly on the disruptor pistol at her hip. During one such pause, huddled in darkness, Daniel found himself acutely aware of her proximity. The faint cinnamon scent he'd noticed before emanated from her skin, some kind of natural pheromone, he guessed. In the pitch black, his other senses heightened, he could hear the slight difference in her breathing pattern compared to a human's, 3 quick inhalations followed by a longer exhale. Why risk so much for an enemy soldier, he whispered when the danger had passed. For long moments, Thera was silent. When she finally answered, her voice was barely audible. Because I have begun to question whether we are truly enemies at all. Their journey continued through the day and into the night. The tunnels eventually gave way to a ravine system that would lead them closer to human territory. Above ground now, they proceeded with extreme caution, using the rugged terrain for cover. During a brief rest in the shelter of a massive fallen tree-like organism, they shared the last of the rations. The twin moons of Caraxes cast an eerie glow over the alien landscape, turning the red soil to a deep burgundy. The familiar sounds of Earth's nights, crickets, owls, the rustle of small creatures, were replaced by the haunting calls of Cardassian nocturnal life and the distant rumble of geothermal vents. "You know much about human culture," Daniel observed, watching Thera scan the horizon with practiced efficiency. "More than military intelligence would require." She lowered her scanner, regarding him thoughtfully. "I had access to extensive cultural archives captured during the early conflicts. I found your literature fascinating. Your Shakespeare, Tagore, Morrison, they speak to universal experiences, despite our differences." "You read Earth literature for fun?" Daniel couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "Is that so difficult to believe?" There was a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "That a Cardassian might appreciate beauty, art, philosophy?" Daniel considered this. "Our propaganda doesn't exactly portray your people as poetry enthusiasts. Nor does ours portray humans as anything but violent expansionists." She looked away. "Yet here you are, showing mercy to an enemy combatant rather than attempting to kill me at the first opportunity." "You saved my life," he reminded her. "Many in your military would consider that irrelevant when weighed against tactical advantage." Her violet eyes studied him. "You are not what I expected, Daniel Walsh." "Neither are you," he admitted. They fell into companionable silence as night deepened around them. Eventually, Thera pointed toward a ridge in the distance. "Beyond those highlands lies the buffer zone. Your forward operating base is approximately 20 kilometers southwest of that position." "You've gotten me much closer than I expected," Daniel said, feeling a strange reluctance at the thought of their journey ending. Thera's expression softened momentarily. "We should reach the ridge by mid-morning if we maintain our pace." They moved on, crossing a dried riverbed that cut through the landscape like a scar. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, forcing them to help each other navigate steep inclines and unstable ground. Each time Thera's hand grasped his, or his steadied her across a gap, the contact lingered a moment longer than necessary. During one particularly challenging climb, Daniel's wound reopened slightly, causing him to lose his grip. He slipped, sliding several meters down the rocky slope before Thera caught him, her strong arms wrapping around his torso. They ended up pressed against each other, his back to her chest, her breath warm against his neck. "Your injury," she murmured, her hands gently probing the bandaged area. "The synth skin has torn." "I'll survive," he said, but made no move to pull away from her embrace. She turned him to face her, their bodies still close as she examined the wound. In the moonlight, her silver-blue skin had an almost luminous quality. Her face, inches from his, showed genuine concern. "We need to rebind this before we continue," she insisted, reaching for her medical supplies. As she worked on his injury, Daniel studied her features. The alienness that had once seemed threatening now held a strange beauty. The curve of her elongated neck, the subtle patterns in her skin that shifted with her movements, the expressiveness of those violet eyes, all combined into something remarkable. "You're staring," she noted without looking up from her task. "Sorry," he replied, not entirely truthful in his apology. "Just trying to understand." "Understand what?" "How everything I've been taught about your people can be so wrong." Her hands paused. "Perhaps not wrong, merely incomplete. As is my understanding of humans." Her gaze met his. "Though it grows more complete with each moment in your company." The air between them charged with unspoken tension. Daniel felt himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by something beyond reason or training or loyalty to his species. Thera's breath caught, her pupils dilating slightly, a physiological response he recognized despite their differences. A sudden noise shattered the moment, the unmistakable whine of Cardassian hover vehicles approaching rapidly from the north. Thera pulled away, instantly alert. "A patrol," she whispered, grabbing their gear. "We must move. Now." They scrambled up the remainder of the slope, finding cover among a cluster of rock formations as searchlights swept the terrain below. Daniel winced as his freshly bandaged wound protested the sudden exertion. Pressed together in the narrow space between two boulders, they watched as the patrol methodically scanned the area. The vehicles were larger than standard units, bearing the distinctive markings of elite Imperial forces. "They should not be this far south," Thera muttered, concern evident in her voice. "These are Royal Guard units, not regular military." "Royal Guard?" Daniel echoed. "As in, the Emperor's personal forces?" Before she could answer, a voice called out from the lead vehicle, amplified by external speakers. The words were in Cardassian, but the authoritative tone needed no translation. Thera tensed beside him, her expression shifting to one of alarm. "What are they saying?" Daniel whispered. "They are not searching for you," she replied, her voice strangely hollow. "They are searching for me." The searchlights intensified, sweeping closer to their position. The amplified voice called out again, and this time Daniel caught a word that made his blood run cold, a name that was infamous among Earth's military forces. "Princess Theralith. By order of Emperor Razeth, return to the Imperial vessel immediately." Daniel turned to Thera, shock and disbelief warring on his face. She met his gaze, no longer attempting to hide the truth. "You're the Emperor's daughter," he breathed. "You're Princess Theralith." The silence between them stretched taut as the searchlights swept past their hiding place. Daniel's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle that suddenly made horrifying sense: her extensive knowledge of human culture, her combat training, her reluctance to discuss her position in Cardassian society. "You're the heir to the throne," he whispered, the implications washing over him like ice water. "The daughter of the man responsible for the deaths of millions of humans." Theralith, held his gaze unflinchingly. "I did not lie about who I am, Daniel. Only about my title." "A rather significant omission," he hissed, instinctively reaching for his sidearm before remembering she had returned it to him only hours earlier. He could have killed her at any moment during their journey, yet she had trusted him with a loaded weapon. The patrol vehicles hovered closer, their engines humming with deadly precision. The amplified voice called out again, more urgent this time. "Princess Theralith. We have tracked your biosignature to this region. Emperor Razeth demands your immediate return. The human territories are not secure." Daniel stared at her, the tactical implications spinning through his mind. The Emperor's daughter, the most valuable Cardassian intelligence asset imaginable, had fallen into his lap. If he could somehow alert his base, capture her, or even just report her location, the war could shift dramatically in humanity's favor. As if reading his thoughts, Theralith spoke softly. "If you wish to signal your people about my presence, I will not stop you." She nodded toward his comm unit. It would be the logical action of a loyal soldier. Daniel's hand hovered over his comm, duty warring with something newer and more dangerous. "Why did you do it? Save me, help me, risk everything, when you knew who you were?" "Because I needed to understand," she replied, her violet eyes reflecting the harsh searchlights that swept ever closer. "My father sees humans only as a threat to be eliminated. The Royal Council speaks only of conquest and subjugation. I needed to know if there could be another way." "And what did you learn?" Daniel asked, his hand still suspended above his comm unit. "That there is more honor, compassion, and wisdom in one wounded human soldier than in all the Imperial court." A sad smile curved her lips. "And that I cannot return to being merely the Emperor's weapon." Below them, the patrol had begun to deploy ground units. Armored Cardassian soldiers fanned out, scanning devices in hand, moving methodically up the slope. "They will find us soon," Theralith said calmly. "You should go. The ridge is less than 2 kilometers east. From there, you can reach your base by nightfall." "And leave you to them?" The words escaped before Daniel could consider their implications. "It is not your concern." She touched his arm gently. "You owe me nothing. I chose this path knowing the consequences." Daniel looked from her to the approaching soldiers, then to the ridge that promised safety. His duty was clear: escape, report, give Earth's forces this unexpected advantage. Yet he found himself unable to move. "What will they do to you?" Theralith's expression hardened. "I am still the heir. They will not harm me physically. My father will simply ensure I never again leave the Imperial Palace without an armed escort." She paused. "And he will use more aggressive methods to correct my sympathetic tendencies toward humans." The thought of her being punished for saving his life twisted something inside Daniel. Before he could respond, a shout from below indicated they had been spotted. Weapons charged with an ominous whine as the soldiers began to converge on their position. "Go," Theralith urged, pushing him toward the eastern path. "Now, while they are focused on me." Daniel hesitated, then made a decision that defied everything he had been trained to do. He grabbed her hand. "Come with me." Her eyes widened. "That is not possible. I cannot defect to humanity. I would be a prisoner, an experiment, a bargaining chip. Nothing more." "Then we find another way," he insisted as the first energy bolts struck the rocks around them. None were aimed to kill, he noticed. They were trying to contain, not eliminate. "The buffer zone. There are neutral settlements there, traders who deal with both sides." Theralith shook her head. "You cannot throw away your future for the woman who saved my life? Who showed me there's more to this war than what I've been told?" Daniel tightened his grip on her hand. "I'm making my choice. Make yours." For a heartbeat, she stood frozen, conflict evident in her alien features. Then, with decisive movement, she pulled a small device from her belt and activated it. A burst of electromagnetic energy erupted outward, temporarily disabling the closest scanners. "The effect will last 60 seconds at most," she said, already moving. "We must use the eastern ravine. It has mineral deposits that will mask our signatures temporarily." They ran, energy bolts sizzling past them as the Royal Guard recovered from the disruption. Daniel's wound screamed in protest, but adrenaline carried him forward, Theralith's hand firmly in his as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The ravine appeared before them, a jagged scar in the landscape that plunged steeply downward. Without hesitation, they descended, half climbing, half sliding down the rocky incline as patrol vehicles roared overhead, their searchlights unable to penetrate the dense mineral formations that surrounded them. At the bottom, they pressed onward through a narrow passage, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant. For nearly an hour they maintained their grueling pace, until finally emerging in a small valley sheltered by towering rock spires. "We should be safe here temporarily," Theralith said, scanning their surroundings. "The minerals in these formations interfere with their tracking systems." Daniel collapsed against a boulder, his wound throbbing mercilessly. The reality of what he had just done began to sink in. He had effectively deserted his post, thrown away his career, possibly committed treason, all for an alien princess who represented everything he had been fighting against. "What happens now?" he asked, looking up at her. Theralith knelt beside him, examining his injury with concern. "Now we survive. The neutral settlement of Vashka is 3 days' journey from here. There are people there who owe me favors, people who see beyond the politics of this war. And after that?" Daniel winced as she applied a fresh synth-skin patch to his reopened wound. "I do not know," she admitted, her voice soft. I cannot return to the Empire while my father rules. And you cannot return to your military now that you have helped me escape. The gravity of their situation settled between them. Two enemies become fugitives, outcasts from their respective societies, bound together by choices that defied logic and duty. Why did you do it? Theralith asked, her fingers lingering on his bandaged side. Help me escape. Your tactical advantage was obvious. Daniel considered the question, searching for an answer that made sense even to himself. Because somewhere between that battlefield and here, you stopped being the enemy and started being Farah. The name, her chosen name, not her royal title, seemed to touch something deep within her. Her expression softened, the regal mask slipping to reveal vulnerability beneath. No one has seen me as simply Farah before, she murmured. Always the princess, the heir, the strategic asset. I see you, Daniel said simply. The distance between them diminished, neither certain who moved first. Her hand came to rest against his face, fingers tracing his features with curious gentleness. Daniel reached up, mirroring the gesture, exploring the smooth contours of her silver-blue skin. This is madness, she whispered, yet she leaned closer. Probably, he agreed, his hand sliding to the nape of her neck, feeling the subtle ridge of her spine beneath his fingers. When their lips met, it was hesitant at first, an exploration of unfamiliar territory. Her lips were warmer than he expected, softer. The sensation sent electricity coursing through him, foreign yet undeniably right. Theralith made a small sound of surprise that transformed into something deeper as she pressed closer, her body molding against his with unexpected familiarity. The kiss deepened, transcending the boundaries of their species as instinct overrode difference. Her fingers tangled in his hair, his arms encircled her waist, pulling her firmly against him. The cinnamon scent of her skin intensified, enveloping them both in a heady cloud that seemed to heighten every sensation. When they finally separated, breathless and dazed, Theralith rested her forehead against his, violet eyes wide with wonder. It seems, she said softly, that our physiologies are more compatible than either of our governments would have us believe. Daniel laughed, the sound strange in the alien wilderness. That might be the most diplomatic description of a kiss I've ever heard. Her lips curved in a smile, a human expression she had adopted, he realized, just for him. Perhaps diplomacy between our species has simply been approaching the problem from the wrong angle. As night fell around them, casting the valley in the ethereal glow of Caraxes's moons, they remained entwined, soldier and princess, human and Carassian, two individuals who had chosen each other over the war that had defined them both. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, pursuit, danger, an uncertain future in the margins between two hostile powers. But for tonight, in this hidden valley on a blood-red world, they had found something neither had believed possible, a connection that defied everything they had been taught about each other. And perhaps, Daniel thought as Theralith's head came to rest against his shoulder, that was worth whatever price they would have to pay. Dawn broke over the valley in shades of crimson and amber, the twin suns of Caraxes climbing slowly above the horizon. Daniel woke with Theralith nestled against him, her silver-blue skin warm against his chest. For a moment, he allowed himself to forget they were fugitives, one a deserter, the other a princess fleeing her own empire. Their night together had transcended the physical differences between their species. What had begun as exploration had transformed into passion, their bodies finding unexpected harmony despite their alien anatomies. Each touch, each kiss had been a revelation, dissolving years of propaganda and prejudice. Theralith stirred, violet eyes opening to meet his. You're thinking too loudly, she murmured, tracing a finger along his jawline. Just contemplating the absurdity of our situation, Daniel replied, catching her hand and pressing his lips to her palm. An Earth Defense Force lieutenant and the Carassian Crown Princess. Former Crown Princess, she corrected, sitting up and reaching for her tactical suit. My father will have already begun the process of disowning me. My younger brother Nazith will be named heir in my place. Daniel watched her dress, admiring the graceful efficiency of her movements. Will he be a better emperor than your father? Worse, she said flatly. He believes even more strongly in Cardassian superiority. He has advocated for complete extermination rather than subjugation of human colonies. The stark reminder of the war waiting beyond their temporary sanctuary sobered them both. They broke camp quickly, erasing all evidence of their presence before setting out toward Vashka, the neutral settlement that represented their best hope of sanctuary. The journey was arduous, taking them through terrain deliberately avoided by both human and Cardassian forces, unstable ground, predator territories, and areas contaminated by early battles. Twice they were forced to hide from Imperial scout ships that streaked overhead, their engines leaving contrails across the alien sky. On the third day, as they crested a ridge overlooking a vast basin, Vashka came into view. Unlike the sterile military installations of either species, it was a sprawling, organic settlement, a patchwork of architectural styles from a dozen different worlds. Traders, mercenaries, deserters, and refugees from both sides of the conflict had created a tenuous neutral ground where commerce trumped imperial or Earth allegiances. Will your contact still help you? Daniel asked as they observed the settlement from their vantage point. Now that you're officially an enemy of the Empire? Theralitha's expression was unreadable. Some will. Others will see opportunity in betraying me. She glanced at him. Our safest approach is to remain anonymous, two more war-weary deserters seeking a fresh start. They entered Vashka as dusk fell, keeping to the shadows as they navigated the bustling marketplace. Daniel marveled at the diversity. Humans and Caraxians moved among numerous other species, conducting business with the universal language of commerce. Here, at least, coexistence seemed possible. Theralith led them to a small establishment tucked between larger structures, its entrance marked with symbols Daniel didn't recognize. Inside, the air was thick with aromatic smoke and the murmur of a dozen languages. She approached the proprietor, a massive, amphibious being with multifaceted eyes, and spoke briefly in a trade language Daniel only partially understood. Credits exchanged hands, and they were led to a private room in the back, simple accommodations with secure communications equipment that looked cobbled together from both human and Cardassian technology. We'll be safe here temporarily, Theralith explained, activating a device that scrambled any surveillance. Morzan owes me his life. He won't betray us. What now? Daniel asked, sinking onto the room's single bed, his wound finally beginning to properly heal. Theralith joined him, her shoulder pressed against his. Now we make a decision. We can disappear into the outer colonies, find a world beyond Imperial or Earth control. Many deserters have built new lives there. Or? Daniel prompted, sensing an alternative in her tone. Or we use what we know, what we are, to try to end this conflict. Her violet eyes held his, intense and serious. Together, we possess intelligence that both sides would kill for. We could leverage that, not for either side, but for peace. Daniel considered this. You're talking about becoming double agents? Or rather, agents for a third side, one that doesn't officially exist. Precisely. She leaned forward, suddenly animated. Think about it, Daniel. I know the Emperor's war plans, the weaknesses in Cardassian defensive systems, the true objectives behind their colonial expansion. You understand Earth's military strategies, diplomatic positions, technological capabilities. We could fabricate intelligence, feed both sides information that leads them to a stalemate rather than decisive victory, Daniel realized, the tactical implications unfolding in his mind. A stalemate that could force negotiation where neither side currently sees the need for it. Theralith nodded. It's dangerous, extraordinarily so. But it could save millions of lives. The audacity of the plan was breathtaking, two individuals attempting to manipulate the course of an interstellar war. Yet there was a certain logic to it. Their unique position, between worlds, between loyalties, gave them perspectives no military strategist on either side possessed. Over the following weeks, they established secure communication channels to selected contacts in both hierarchies, mid-level officers and diplomats dissatisfied with the conflict's escalation. Daniel reached out to his former commander, Captain Ellison, a woman who had always questioned the war's necessity. Therolith contacted a trusted advisor to her father, an elder statesman who had counseled restraint since the conflict began. They lived in constant fear of discovery, changing locations frequently, trusting no one completely. Yet in those stolen moments between missions, between coded transmissions and clandestine meetings, they forged something neither had expected, a genuine partnership that transcended their initial attraction. 6 months after their escape from the Cardassian patrol, they stood on the balcony of their latest safe house, overlooking the vast deserts of Proxima Colony, a human settlement on the edge of contested space. News had reached them that morning. Preliminary peace talks had been scheduled between Earth Defense Force High Command and the Imperial Cardassian delegation. "It's actually happening," Daniel said, still disbelieving despite the official announcement. "They're going to talk instead of fight." Therolith leaned against him, her tall frame fitting perfectly against his side. "One small step. The hardliners on both sides will resist, but it's a beginning. Your intelligence about the new Cardassian pulse cannons was the tipping point," Daniel acknowledged. "Earth's military realized they couldn't win a conventional war against that technology. And your revelation about Earth's new colony ships, capable of establishing self-sustaining settlements in deeper space, convinced my father's advisors that humanity could simply outrun the Empire rather than engaging with it directly." Therolith wrapped her arms around his waist. "A reluctant peace is still peace." Daniel turned to face her, studying the face that had become as familiar to him as his own. In the past months, he had learned every nuance of her expressions, every subtle shift of the patterns beneath her silver-blue skin that indicated her emotional state. "They've requested neutral representatives at the peace conference," he said carefully. "People with knowledge of both cultures who can facilitate communication." Therolith tensed slightly. "You want us to attend?" "I think we've earned the right to see this through," Daniel replied. "And I think both sides would benefit from mediators who truly understand what's at stake." She pulled away, moving to the edge of the balcony. "My father will be there. If he sees me." "You'll be under diplomatic protection," Daniel assured her, following. "And besides, you're no longer just his daughter. You're a symbol of what's possible between our species." Therolith turned, the setting sun catching the iridescent quality of her skin. "And what is possible between us, Daniel Walsh? When this war is truly over, when we are no longer bound by our shared mission, what then?" The question hung between them, laden with uncertainty. Their relationship had been forged in crisis, sustained by shared purpose. Peace would bring new challenges, new choices. Daniel took her hands in his. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know this: I crossed enemy lines for you once. I would do it again. Whatever comes next, we face it together." She studied him, searching his face for doubt and finding none. "There will be those on both sides who see us as abominations. A human and a Cardassian, it defies all social conventions." "Then we'll defy them together," Daniel said simply. "After manipulating 2 interstellar powers into peace talks, how hard can that be?" The laugh that escaped her was genuine, the sound Daniel had come to treasure above all others. She stepped into his embrace, her body fitting against his in the way that still amazed him, so alien, yet so perfectly complementary. 2 months later, they stood in the grand reception hall of the neutral diplomatic station orbiting Proxima Centauri. Delegates from Earth and the Cardassian Empire mingled uneasily, centuries of mistrust not easily overcome despite the recently signed preliminary accords. Daniel, dressed in formal civilian attire rather than his military uniform, felt the weight of stares from his former comrades. To them, He was a curiosity at best, a traitor at worst, the human who had chosen an alien princess over his own kind. Across the room, Emperor Razeth himself stood surrounded by his delegation. The imposing Cardassian ruler's gaze repeatedly drifted to where his daughter stood by Daniel's side, his expression unreadable to human observers but clearly troubled to those who understood Cardassian physiognomy. "He wishes to speak with me," Theralith murmured, sensing her father's attention. "Alone." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Are you ready for that?" She took a deep breath, straightening to her full height, every inch the princess despite her self-imposed exile. "Yes. Some wounds must be lanced before healing can begin." As she moved gracefully across the room toward the father who had declared her dead to the Empire, Daniel watched with pride and concern. Their journey had been impossible, dangerous, fraught with betrayal and sacrifice. Yet it had led here, to a moment when peace between their species seemed not just possible but inevitable. Captain Ellison approached, her expression guarded but not hostile. "Lieutenant Walsh. Or is it just Daniel now?" "Just Daniel," he confirmed, turning to face his former commander. "Thank you for supporting the peace initiative. Your intelligence proved accurate," she acknowledged. "And your perspective on Cardassian culture has been valuable." Her eyes drifted to where Theralith now stood in formal conversation with Emperor Razeth. "Is it true what they say? About you and the princess?" Daniel smiled, watching as Theralith maintained her diplomatic composure despite what must be an emotionally charged exchange. "Depends on what they're saying. That you found something worth fighting for beyond flags and borders," Ellison replied simply. Across the room, Theralith concluded her conversation with a formal bow to her father. The Emperor's posture had softened slightly, not reconciliation, perhaps, but acknowledgement. It was a beginning. As Theralith returned to his side, her violet eyes bright with emotion contained but not concealed, Daniel knew with absolute certainty that every choice, every risk had been worth it. They had changed the course of a war, challenged the prejudices of two species, and found in each other something neither had believed possible. "My father has agreed to consider an exchange of cultural emissaries," Theralith reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of this concession. "Scientific and artistic representatives rather than just diplomatic ones." "It's more than we hoped for," Daniel said, taking her hand openly, no longer concerned with who might see or judge. Beyond the transparent dome of the diplomatic station, the stars shone with cold brilliance, the same stars that had witnessed countless battles between their peoples, and now bore witness to the first tentative steps toward genuine peace. Daniel looked at the woman beside him, alien and yet more familiar to him than anyone in his life had ever been, and saw in her eyes the reflection of a future neither of them could have imagined when she had first dragged a wounded enemy soldier to safety on a blood-red battlefield. "What happens now?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed in that hidden valley months ago. Theralith smiled, an expression she had once had to learn but now came naturally. "Now we build something new," she said, leaning close to press her forehead against his in the gesture that had become their most intimate connection. "Something neither human nor Cardassian, but entirely our own." As the delegates continued their cautious diplomatic dance around them, Daniel and Theralith stood together, living proof that even in the vastness of space, across the divide of different worlds and different biologies, connection was not just possible but necessary. The war that had brought them together was ending. The journey that lay ahead, uncharted, unpredictable, but faced together, was just beginning.